Good afternoon, everyone. Osio Nagaru, and welcome to the third episode in our Resilience Recipes Native Foodpreneurs Cooking Demonstration Series. Kalieli ga Jijidoa. Dr. Courtney Lewis Dagodoa, Jijalagi. I'm Dr. Courtney Lewis. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. I'm the current Andrew W. Millen Visiting Professor of Justice, Equality, and Community in Anthropology at Davidson College. I'm also an assistant professor at the Department of Anthropology and the Institute for Southern Studies at the University of South Carolina. My off-screen co-organizer is Dr. Rose Drumlow, Associate Professor of History at Davidson College. Before we begin today, it would be disingenuous of me not to briefly acknowledge the ongoing events of this weekend and put them in an American Indian context for our audience members who may not understand why so many American Indians are showing solidarity with groups like Black Lives Matter. According to the Lakota People Law Project 2015 report entitled Native Lives Matter, American Indians have the highest rate of being killed by law enforcement officers of any group in the United States. At 1% of the population, American Indians comprise nearly 2% of all police killings. In fact, former officer Derek Chauvin, who kneeled on George Floyd's neck, was also involved in a 2011 shooting of 23-year-old Alaskan native Leroy Martinez, whose hands were up at the time he was shot at the Little Earth of United Tribes housing complex in South Minneapolis. While this may seem far from the topic of our series, the reality for Indigenous peoples is that the reclaiming of foods and foodways is an act of resistance. Our very first chef in this series, Yazi the Chef, fed and nourished water protectors at Standing Rock, the event that was the rehearsal for much of the police and military actions we saw over this weekend. Reclaiming our foods, nourishing ourselves, and sustaining our practices is survivance in action. So with that, today we are excited to bring you two chefs, Chef Vincent Medina and Chef Louis Trevino, whose appearance is made possible by the Justice, Equality, and Community Initiative at Davidson College, generously funded by the Mellon Foundation. Chef Vincent is a Muwekma Ohlone Tribe's Indigenous rights, language, and food activist. He co-founded Cafe Ohlone, an Ohlone restaurant in Berkeley, California, which serves Indigenous cuisine made with native ingredients sourced from the San Francisco and Monterey Bay areas. He's also a member of the board of director of Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival. Chef Louis Trevino is a Rumsen Ohlone community member, active in the cultural revitalization efforts of his people. He's focused primarily on the revitalization of the Rumsen language and traditional Ohlone foods. He's working towards a full and holistic revitalization of the lifeways of his ancestors, including language, story, song, art, food, and all aspects of traditional Rumsen Ohlone culture. Together, Chefs Vincent and Louis are co-founders of the Makama organization and restaurant focused on reviving and strengthening traditional Ohlone foods and sharing them with their communities. So welcome and thank you, Wado, for being with us today. We are so happy that you will be here and you will be presenting for us and demonstrating a dish of clams and mussels with Indian onion, spring garlic, and a California seaweed Ohlone salad, correct?
Yes.
How are you all today?
We are definitely trying to make the best of the situation that we're in right now. We're in a very changing time, a transitional time right now that we're aware of. And during these times of transition and of change, we find it especially important to make sure that our culture is spread within our community, to our families. During this time of slowdown, during the pandemic, we are especially happy to see these foods as well as our language and as much of our culture as we can see shared, passed on to our family in a very beautiful multi-generational efforts. And we're going to be preparing a very traditional meal for you all today, a meal that our ancestors would recognize, and a meal that makes our bellies and our hearts feel happy when we eat it, because we taste those same flavors that our family right here in this area has always loved, and the flavors that we know will be carried on into our future as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for putting this dish together for us.
Absolutely. Yes, we're grateful to have a platform to share some of our story and teach people about how beautiful our culture is, how living it is, how our community is working as hard as we can to keep these ways strong, and we're certain that they'll be carried on into the future as well.
Well, with your hard work and effort, it looks like it's already happening. So
I'd like to acknowledge, before we start, the elders in our community, our ancestors who allow us to be at this moment right now, where we can be able to see this revival, to be able to see these ways come back. Our great-grandparents, they worked so hard so that we could be here today and have our culture strong. I'd like to acknowledge my great-grandmother, Mary Archuleta, who was born on the old Pleasanton Rancheria. My great-grandmother never stopped caring about our culture, even when she went through hard times, a lot of injustice, a lot of unfairness and racism. She wouldn't let those things affect her. Because of people that we learned from, like our great-grandparents, we're taught the respect that we should have for our culture. We saw how much they love our culture, and because of them, we love our culture as well. And that love is going to be passed on. It has no end, and it will continue all the way until the end. We're certain, and we're grateful that we can just be doing our part for and making sure that we make our ancestors proud.
Every day, right? Before or while you all begin, I just want to let our audience know that while the chefs are creating their dish, they are going to be doing this live for us today. We're going to take your questions through the YouTube chat window, so feel free to type along as you're watching the video and as you're watching the chefs put together these dishes. If you do feel comfortable, you can be anonymous, but also if you feel comfortable, let us know your name, where you're located. Are you student, faculty, community member? We would love to know who's participating. So with that, I will turn this over to you all. You can kind of explain the dish. I know a lot of people are curious about the sources of your food, especially during the pandemic, right? Have your sources been affected by what's going on right now? But I will turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to start off by saying to you all who are watching, Horshetu hi makam, kanakrakat Vincent Medina, aya kanak muek mataresh, kanamu ek maknana rakat Luis Trevino, aya wakai kakum fushtaresh, aya nesa makarote halkin, Horshewara, manne maksuyak mahisui hamentuhi, aya manne mak muek meishanetuhi aya. What I just shared with you all in Chochenyo, which is the very first language that's ever been spoken here in the East Bay, and the language that's still spoken by my family and my tribe to this day after a very successful language revival. What I said is, hello, Horshetuhi. My name is Vincent Medina, and I'm a member of the Moekma Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm the co-founder of Cafe Ohlone and Makamham. With me is my partner, Luis Trevino. Luis is Rumson Ohlone, and his family comes just south of here in the Carmel Valley, but he's very much a part of our family up here as well. Luis and myself, we started Cafe Ohlone in September of 2018 because we wanted to teach people about our culture, how beautiful it is, and to provide a space for our people within our very urban, but very, very, very beautiful homeland. We also, before we started Cafe Ohlone, we started a nonprofit organization called Makamham. Makamham in Chochenyo, it means our food. And the entire focus of this work is to listen to our elders about the love that they have for our traditional Ohlone foods, go through thousands of pages of old archives that were recorded from our family from before, to be able to see these ways revived, passed on intergenerationally again, the way that it was intended. And through a series of gathering trips, dinners for our community, as well as cooking classes, we've been able to see these foods become widespread in our community again, tied in with language, story, land stewardship, and all these beautiful practices that have always been done right here long before colonization and will be done in the future as well. I'd also said in Chochenyo, where we're at right now is an area called Halkin. This is an area that my family has always lived in. We've never left, literally. My ancestors have always lived right here, where I'm at right now. My great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, to be very specific, was born directly where I'm at right now. And that was the first generation of my family that encountered hardship with colonization. Our ancestors were enslaved in the missions, but in spite of that, they never left this area. They found every way possible to remain a permanent footprint here. They refused to leave and refused to give up our culture. After our family was freed from slavery in the missions, our family went right back to those most traditional, oldest areas. And as a result of our family never leaving, our great-grandparents' strength and all the strength of those generations before, we continue to live and thrive right here in this oldest area where the love for this place is so deep that words can never fully describe it. But we know we'll be here tomorrow too. These foods that we're going to be preparing for you, hayao, shoro, kahamara, charishmin, mamakwa, aye kaha puhut. These are foods that have been always eaten in this area and foods that are traditional, that are enjoyed by our ancestors, but enjoyed by our contemporary community as well. Because of the pandemic, we've had to make a few accommodations today. And we're going to introduce this menu, and there's going to be one part of this menu that isn't necessarily a traditional food, but we're going to describe why we're serving it as well. And I'll get to that in just a moment. For the main dish that we're going to have hayao, which are these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful mussels that are right here. Beautiful mussels that have always been enjoyed by our people. And these mussels, they've already been bearded or debearded, which means that the tough part has been pulled out that attaches to rocks that can be a little bit too chewy and tough. And also we are going to have these beautiful clams right here as well. These clams, which are something that the Washington clams from further up north, which make many of the beads on our jewelry, including these beads that you see right here, and as well on Lewis's beautiful necklace too. It's also traditional money for us when they're made into those beads as well. Different species, but still clams. We also would like to acknowledge before we make this meal, an elder in our community, our beloved Auntie Billy, Kimberly Stevena, who is Northern Sierra Miwok. And Auntie Billy has always taught us. She's taught us about foods. She teaches us about jewelry. She teaches us about as much as she can remember and as much as she wants to share with us. I'd like to say that. But Auntie Billy, she has so much love and she inspires us all the time. And we're also going to be making a tea, which is one of her favorite teas that we're going to be sharing with you all, which is a minty yerba buena, which is a native Ohlone mint that we gather, as well as rosehip, mamakwa, which is extremely high in vitamin C. And we call this the minty rose because of our Auntie Billy as well. So that will be part of this meal. We're going to have what in Chochenyo we call kahamara, which is an Ohlone salad. We call it an Ohlone salad because it's full of all these greens that our people have always loved. Watercress that right now isn't growing and it's up in the hills because it's a little bit too hot right now. But we got some watercress at the farmer's market that's raised in greenhouses, still have that same flavor. I'd like to acknowledge my grandfather, Louis Medina, who is a big fan of this watercress as well. And it always makes us feel happy to have foods that make us think about our family and our elders. In this salad, there's going to be gooseberry, which we call shawana, which are these beautiful little orange berries that are nice and sweet and tart and a little bit sour, sweet at the same time. Fresh blackberries from the farmer's markets, walnut that we just cracked in a mortar, as well as a blackberry and bay laurel sauce. With the bay laurel we gather up in the East Bay Hills in areas that our family have always gathered in. We're going to also, for this recipe that I was sharing that isn't traditional, we want to be realistic to the times that we're in. And a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard of quarantine bacon right now, right? It's a thing. And so we typically, we don't eat bread, Western bread, typically in our diet, or we don't serve that at Cafe Ohlone because our community, including myself, I'll be very honest, has some gluten intolerances. And so much of this work to decolonize our diet, it means taking out things that have been harmful to us. refined sugars, wheat flours, alcohol, pork, things that we know weren't here in those old days, but things that we also know caused a negative impact to our community's health and well-being.
Mhm.
So we did some research though, and we're also in the Bay Area, which is a very, very, very big area for sourdough, for those who know about that. And we've been doing some research, and it turns out that because sourdough is a fermented food, it actually does something where it partially neutralizes the gluten because of the fermentation. It has all these wonderful probiotics in it as well. Louis and myself, we were wondering, should we do this quarantine baking thing? What would this be like? Should we experiment with it? How are we going to do this? We just thought, why not try it and see how it bothers us and just try it for ourselves. So we made a sourdough loaf with, but we always have to Ohloneize everything, even sourdough bread. So we enriched the sourdough bread with acorn oil. Let me show you this right here.
Fantastic.
This is Coast Live acorn oil, if you look right there, and Coast Live oak, excuse me. And this acorn oil, it's from the acorns being pressed in an oil press, and acorns have a wonderful, wonderful, rich, nutty oil, and that's enriching this bread. So if you look at this bread right here,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to see it's just a little bit darker. Wow. And that reason is because the acorn oil gives it gives it a little bit more color, but it also gives it a really, really wonderful flavor that makes us feel more connected than a typical sourdough would. So we're going to have some crusty sourdough with those mussels to soak up all of that juice from the seaweed, the locally gathered California seaweed. And because we couldn't go up and gather our onions up in the hills right now, there's many of the parks are closed, but also when we go up on the trails, they're packed, and it gives us a lot of anxiety. And that's unfortunately a part of this quarantine, is that we're not able to necessarily go to those old spaces, which reminds us, this is colonization in action right now, when we're not able to go to spaces that we've always gone to because of other people's restrictions or placing those on us. And while we understand why we need to be in quarantine, we're going as slowly and as carefully as possible. Mm-hmm. We also have to be honest that it does make us feel a little bit sad that we can't go up right now as we typically do because of fear of the disease spreading. And but we know that we have to protect our elders and our family. So we're making those choices not to right now. So in the process, in the meantime, we're going to be using these beautiful farmers market scallions to substitute for our Indian onions that are right here. And these will be chopped up real fine and added to those clams and mussels. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, just one moment. So I'd like to, before I move on though, to start this process, are there any initial questions that anybody has for us? Because we want to make this interactive. We're really good at multitasking. So if you have some questions, feel free. But if,
let me see. I think you had one question on what is the Indian onion? Is it a ramp? Is it like a lawn onion? What's it similar to?
It's similar to a ramp. It's a tri-flowered onion that grows. It's a long onion, so it's not a bulb, but it's a long onion that's, it has a bulb, of course, but the green is the thing that's prized. Very delicate, 3 flowers on top. And those typically grow in between March to about right now, where we're at right now. And then they start to wither away. Yeah, then next year, of course, they'll grow. Another thing that we would like to add is because we aren't able to gather in that same way right at this moment, we've been growing a lot of our own foods here at home. Yeah. And so part of the salad that you're going to be having, we're going to be including this beautiful redwood sorrel right here. Mm-hmm. And this is the native California sorrel that's here. And we've been growing this, and our plants are thriving right now in our garden. And this redwood sorrel, it's so fine and so delicate, and we're happy to be able to have this in our salad. We'd like for all you to have some, but we'll do our best to describe the taste. The taste, it's sweet, tart, sour, but also very, very, very earthy. So if you could think of a green apple, mixed with like watercress. I think that that's the best description. They're amazing. I wish you could all have some. And
yeah, we wish so too.
so let's get started then. We're gonna start with these mussels and clams. And once again, thank you to Auntie Billy. Steve not here for reminding us and teaching us, you know, in the past of how to make this, because this is a meal that we like to serve at Cafe Ohlone. And as the clams are cooking, I'll talk a bit about the shell mounds and what those shell mounds represent in our community for us. But I'd like to show you what these clams look like, what these mussels look like. So these ones right here, typically we would gather our mussels right on the bay shore. We're just a little bit past though. We're about 2 weeks past the safe time to gather mussels right now. And so we didn't get these ones from the bay shore, but we got them from a sustainable fish market that we partner with, which has California mussels and California clams. So it's still local, just a way to keep it close to us when we're not able to gather them. But what you do, as I like to show you first, is when you're making mussels, the first thing is you got to debeard them. So if they have these little beards on them, which means little rough parts, let's see if I could find one. You can kind of see one like right here. If you look closely, see that?
A little bit over.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, so if you just like pull that out, those are the beards right there. You just got to yank them out, and then they'll eventually, that's the one tough part that you want to pull. You got to scrub them. All of these are scrubbed and clean. But this batch right here that I have in this bowl, these ones aren't good to eat. And the reason why is because they were already opened. Now, if they're opened, what you could usually do, just give it just a little tap. So if you get a little butter knife or something, just give it a tap. If it closes, because these are living still, it means it's okay to eat. If it doesn't close, you gotta discard it because it can give you some serious stomach problems. So we have these right here, and then we have these beautiful clams as well. These clams, which are kumai clams, which come from just in Southern California, and they've been on ice, but I'm gonna put them in the oven right now because we wanna get them started. So what I'm going to do is if you look at this green dish right here, I'm going to put in these mussels. If you got extra water, drain the extra water. Okay. Now I'm going to drain the clams first. Okay, the clams are going into the dish as well. And sometimes, to be very honest, you got too many clams for one pot, or too many mussels for one pot. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to divide it up a little bit into two different, so that they are able to steam fully and carefully. Okay, so we got one tray right here, clams, all clams and mussels. We're going to put this in. It's going to go in for 450 degrees, and I'll tell you how you know that they're done.
Is there any other liquid in there, or is it just the clams?
It's just the clams and just the mussels, no other liquid whatsoever. Yeah, we like to really let the ingredients shine because they're so, these ingredients and these clams and mussels are just so rich on their own that we, and they don't need any salt. They have their own brininess. They have their own salt from being in the water. They're just so perfect, and we like that to just really come through. But we're going to add a few little things that will really just kind of complement it, and I'll describe that in just a moment. We're putting this one in as well. Once again, just a little bit more clams and mussels. Okay, so it's 1:26 right now. So we're gonna check on those in about 10 minutes. Okay. As soon as all of them open, then we know that they're ready to go. Now what we're gonna do is simultaneously, I'm gonna change this camera just a little bit over here. And every Ohlone person I know loves a big, good cast iron pan. That's the best way to cook. So we got this cast iron on. Turn that heat up. Got 2 cups of water right here. This water is going to go into this cast iron. We're going to let that heat up, let that boil. And one of the great things is when you're always cooking Ohlone food in this cast iron pan, those oils will also get connected to this water. And it means that all like those other good foods like quail and rabbit and venison tenderloin we cooked in here, they're all part of this meal as well, which is really nice. One of the great things about a cast iron is that it has a memory too. So we're able to tap into that. So the cast iron right now is heating up. And once this cast iron heats up, we're going to incorporate just one of these, not all of them, but just one. These are California seaweed cakes right here. We're coastal people in California, where my community lives. We live right on the bay shore. Literally 2 blocks that way is the bay. And it's really nice because the pickleweed marsh is right here, and we got that beautiful bay breeze every morning. And in the old days, our ancestors would gather these shellfish 2 blocks from here. So today, even though we're in a modern world, we're still doing the same thing, which feels really good, even if it's in a slightly modern way in a modern day kitchen. Nothing wrong with that. Now, this right here is that seaweed that's gathered, and we'd like to acknowledge Alicia Adams, who is one of our, she works with us at Cafe Ohlone, and we call her Tanna, which means big sister in Chorcheño. And Alicia gifted us this seaweed, and a lot of this work takes community, as I'm sure many of you know. People working together to be able to work for those common goals. And so many communities are part of this meal in every way. So as this is heating up, I'd also like to show you this tea that Louis just beautifully made. This tea right here, this is the minty rose. Look at how beautiful that is. And that's the rose hip, the yerba buena that's there. And it all seeps together until it creates this wonderful floral minty tea. Nothing needs to be added to it, just the tea and the dry yerba buena and the rose hips on its own. We'll let that seep for about 10 more minutes, and then we'll have some of that in a bit.
Okay. A couple of questions. Let's see. Are there different types of seaweed that you all use? Is that your primary seaweed? You pull from different areas?
So this one is particular. There are many seaweeds that we use. We have many terms in Chorcheño for them, and I'm not that great at the English terms for them, which I'm gonna be honest about. But this one right here, in English, I know that this one is called sea lettuce, which is something that's native to right here on the bay shore. And the sea lettuce, it's something that has like this incredible umami-ness and earthiness and mineralness to it. It has a very different taste, but it's also something that again connects us to that old world. This water is already boiling, so the seaweed, it's going to go in right now. So if you look, I'm just gonna, there we go. And then we'll let that cook for about 5 minutes until there's a nice broth that starts getting made. And I'm gonna add just a little bit more water as well.
Okay. One more question. Besides your amazing cast iron pot, are there other staple tools at your Ohlone Kitchen Cafe?
Besides, could you repeat the whole question? Excuse me.
Besides the cast iron pan, which is fantastic, are there other staple tools that you all use at the Ohlone Cafe?
Absolutely. Let me show you some of them. So, excuse me. So right here, so we cook, so we want to acknowledge that, well, we're not doing it at this moment. People in our community, including one of the most renowned acorn chefs in the world, our Auntie Billy, cook in woven baskets. And our Auntie Billy's basket that she cooks in is her grandmother's basket that's been in her family for a long time. And she makes the acorn soup with hot rocks in that basket. And she'll occasionally bring it to Cafe Ohlone if we're lucky. But that acorn soup that's there, that's the traditional way to make it, with hot rocks in a woven, watertight cooking basket, which shows how fine our basketry is. And also, we want people to know that these baskets, that they're still made and woven even to this day. This is a smaller basket that we have right here. This is called a warshin in Rumsen language. And this basket is full of acorn, which is our most staple traditional food. These are some big chunky black oaks right here. And these acorns that are here, we will grind them down in a mortar. Let me show you that. So we'll grind them down in a mortar. Nowadays, we use contemporary mortars that are right here. Often, we have in our family as well, some very old ones that are special, especially dear to us because they're from our ancestors and have been passed on. But we like to keep those very safe and not to bother those. And so these ones are contemporary mortars that we use, have that same method of cooking. Using the stone mortar, everything tastes better in the stone in that old way as well. It just gives it an extra flavor. We gather our salts. So all the salt that you're going to, or we say that you're going to be having, that we're going to be having, is salt that comes from the East Bay shoreline. So this salt right here comes directly from an area called Toiwun, which is right about 5 miles south of here, 10 miles south of here. Mm-hmm. And the salt, it comes from the salt ponds that our ancestors have actually formed. They shaped those salt ponds. And so later in the mid 1800s to the early 1900s, when Americans came in, they try to use that salt as a profit and try to remove our people from the land. However, there's a very strong documentation. There's very strong documentation about how during that time, when Americans were trying to force our family from the land, how our family refused to leave, and how they actually issued formal complaints and were successful in being able to obtain hunting rights and gathering rights on the Bay Shore, which is right here in this area that we're still in. And so it's a reminder of how our family has always defended our food and made sure our culture was safe, even through hard times. The salt sits in every bit of the food that we make as well.
So are the salt ponds, is this where the ocean washes up into the pond, and then as the water evaporates, the salt is left? And that's
exactly, yes, because where the bay's at, the bay is San Francisco Bay. It has one small opening into the ocean and through the Golden Gates, and then the rest of it is this massive, relatively still bay that goes about 50 miles long in length, and it's only about 10 miles wide. And in that bay, there's just so much life that's there. There's huge biodiversity that's there, huge amounts of food sources, but also reverence for that bay as well. And traditionally, and to this day, that bay is prayed to. That bay is given gratitude and offerings, and that's something that connects us to the spirit of that place, which is more than just a source of food or a transportation routes, which it also is, but it's much more, it's a spiritual place for us too. Makomuch, we call it, our bay. And that's why also Ohlone people are inherently environmentalists too, because we want to make sure that our home is protected and safe and clean. Now, this is what the acorn flour looks like when it's all processed. This is pan oak acorn flour that we make into acorn soup and acorn bread.
Is the acorn bread, how would you describe that to the people watching right now?
Acorn bread, it's, I wish I had some to show you all, but it's, what happens is the acorn soup, it gets cooked down, and acorn soup is a gelatinous thing. And so when it gets cooked down, it gets thicker and thicker and thicker until it becomes like a pudding, like a very, very, very thick pudding. And then it's so sweet and nutty. So as you cook it down, all those sweet notes of the acorn, they just amplify. So it's like you're eating something sweet and earthy, and there's no way to compare it. It's incomparable. But this acorn though, when it gets cooked down far enough, it gets to a point where you could start to roll it into these little balls about this big. And those balls, you bake them. Traditionally, they'd be cooked in an earth oven, or they would even just be laid in some water to make water biscuits. But nowadays, for us, we make them primarily in the oven. And the acorn bread, when you bite into it, it has this wonderful crust on the outside, a crunch, but then the inside has like the sweetness and a gelatinousness that's so good. Oh my gosh, I want some right now. It's like it goes so good with coffee in the morning too. But that acorn bread, which we call shetman and chochenyo, is one of those most traditional foods, and we eat that as much as we can.
I want some right now too.
I know, it's so good. Okay, so Louis is working on that beautiful watercress salad right now, and I'm going to check on these mussels to see how these are coming out. And they might need a few more minutes, but if not, we might be ready to start making the next steps here.
Right. So who else works at the Ohlone Cafe? Tell us a little bit about who you all work with.
We need just about 5 more minutes, I think. So good question. So we would like to acknowledge our staff that's with us as well. Our administrator who does so much work with us behind the scenes is Deirdre Green, who's actually tuned in right now. So Horshe Tuhi Deirdre. She is definitely holding a lot of the pieces together at Cafe Ohlone with a lot of the requests, because it's so multifaceted. You know, it's speaking engagements, cooking demonstrations, the cafe, as well as the community work that we do. And Deirdre is so masterful at holding all these pieces together and making it all fit. Alicia Adams works with us, who's Maidu in Chimoevi. She's an indigenous woman from just up north, and she's somebody who is a basket weaver and a traditional roundhouse dancer. And Alicia is she's a wonderful person and a good friend of ours as well. We have 2 Moekma Ohlone tribal members working with us, Grace Rano and Frankie Rano, who are a brother and sister, Grace and Frankie. And they're just really good, really young tribal youth people who are working right now to keep these foods strong in their family. We come from different lineages, and it makes us feel happy to know that these foods are reaching other lineages in our tribe, and that the cafe can employ our tribal members as well. And then we have a really wonderful staff of volunteers. We have Cerise Palmatier, who's indigenous from Washington, our DJ, Melissa Archie, who's Akil Odom from Arizona. We have Rihanna Hensel, and Ann Spire, and Rivka Kanan, who aren't Native themselves, but are allies of our community that volunteer their time to see these foods grow stronger. And allies are important in this work as well. We want to acknowledge those allies who stand with us, even if they're not Ohlone, because this is how we see change happen outside of the community as well, is by being able to have people stand up for us, stand up for Indigenous people, even when we're not around. And we got a really good group of people that are working with us that we're grateful for. And we see good things happen there together. It's a very good, solid team of trust and a lot of mutual respect.
Yeah, we usually get questions on how can non-Native peoples contribute to Indigenous food sovereignty movements, and that's one very good way, other than going to the cafes, which we can't do too much these days, or buying food, but there's also these kind of opportunities, right?
That's right. That's right. So the seaweed broth, it's all finished now. I'm going to just chop up these onions over here. In fact, I think I'm going to right here. Wow, look at those. Louis is picking the redwood sorrel, and Louis has this way where everything he does is so detailed and perfect. Yeah. And so you can see what these sorrel leaves look like right here. They look like something that should be in the MoMA or in the art museum. Okay, so we're gonna chop up these beautiful scallions here. Okay. Which, just a tip for you all, if you have a farmer's market close to you, green onions do the trick if you need to for something like this, but those farmer's market scallions, they always taste the most similar to the gathered foods for some reason. So it's always just something you can do in a pinch if you have a farmer's market around you. It's also good to support those farmers, many of which who are struggling right now as well during this time, and to see a lot of folks who are also not getting the treatment that they deserve. A lot of people who are being treated badly, and it feels good to be able to see people be able to succeed and be able to see each other come together and support one another too. So much love to those farmers market farmers that are there, and to the work that they do to keep things strong and to keep these foods around as well. So I'm going to chop this up real fast, and then we're going to add this in a bit to that mixture of the mussels and the clams.
And if people in the audience are looking to support local farmers, local agriculture, please check in the CSAs.
Yeah, definitely.
Culture boxes. Many farmers have moved to doing these kind of boxes, usually weekly. And there are resources to access which states, and I know there's some that are regional, especially in the South. By state, you can see which farmers have switched over to CSA. So do check into that. Let me see. And sort of relatedly, we have a question on if climate change, or how is climate change impacting Ohlone food sovereignty? Are you seeing any issues with your gathering these days due to climate change?
Absolutely. And let me talk about that in just a moment, because the clams and the mussels are done.
Oh, good.
Wow, these look great. I want to dive into them right now.
Well, you can. We don't judge here. So.
All right, look at this, everybody.
Oh, that is beautiful.
All right, now let's get the other ones out. All right, Auntie Billy, they cannot write. I know she's watching too. We always have to live up to our elder standards, which are all the way up here. All right, now what we're going to do is, let's see, we have right here. Oh, another thing, just a reminder to you all, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this, but put those scallions, again, just in a little bit of water and they'll grow. During this time of people staying in, why go out more than you gotta? Just keep some scallions at home, save those roots in some water, they'll grow back up, and it's a way to be sustainable without wasting those roots. We've been doing that a lot, but we wanted to have some super fresh ones for all of you today. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to get, let me show you the seaweed broth now. The seaweed expanded, it's so rich. So if you look right here, this is the seaweed broth. That's the seaweed right there. It's all steamy. Now, using a ladle, going to, let me try to move this a little. Okay, going to take a few ladlefuls of this onto the mussels.
And is that just the seaweed in water, no salt,
No salt, no nothing, just the seaweed and water. You know what, I'm gonna put 4, because it's a small ladle, I'm gonna put 4 ladles on here, and then since this is a smaller one right here, I'm just gonna do 2. Okay. Now you get this green onion that's right here, the scallion, toss that all in.
Yep.
As much as you like. Okay. Now, this is the part that you can't miss right here. After it's all hot and steamy, everything's all in there, the onions, the broth, get a few tongs or a couple of stirrers, and just carefully mix it all together so that the green onion, the seaweed broth, it all coats. Oh my gosh, if you could smell this right now.
I smell it in my heart.
All right, and I'm a pretty oniony person, so that's. I'd also like to acknowledge our elder, our Auntie Joanne Bros, who's also Joanne Bros Masia, who's also on the recording right now, and somebody who's on our tribal council, a respected elder. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge both my grandmother, Bonnie Medina, and also Lewis's grandmother, Mary Lou Yamas, who are both watching right now as well. So hello to our grandmothers, and thank you both for tuning in.
Thank you all for tuning in.
All right, I think that this is the mussels and the clams are ready. So let me show you this now that it's all done, what it looks like. There we go.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh.
So they're all open. You know that they're ready, everybody, when every single one of them is open. When they pop open, they're ready to go. But remember, if you get the fresh mussels or fresh oysters and they are open, before you cook them, they're not good. So when they're cooked, open is good. When they're not cooked, open is bad, okay? So just a little reminder there. So just what we do is if you take the ones that are closed, that have been already open before you cook them, what we do is you can grind them down and you can add them to your garden for the shell, the calcium. That way you're not wasting them as well. You know, they're still living beings. We want to make sure they're treated with some respect too, and not just discarded like if they're garbage or something like that. We like to save our shells as much as we can. Before we eat, and as Lewis is working on this beautiful salad that's here, I'd like to mention that one thing that we think about as we eat this meal is our shell mounds. And shell mounds here in the San Francisco Bay Area are monuments that have been built by the hands of our ancestors. Massive monuments, some of which, just for comparison, and not to compare, but just so you can understand the size, some of these monuments were even larger than pyramids over in Egypt. These monuments were huge, and they are places that our ancestors would be interred after they passed. For thousands and thousands and thousands of years, they grew over time to be larger and larger and larger. Where when Americans, and before that, the Spanish came in, they noticed how big they were, and they would use them as navigating places when they were coming into San Francisco Bay. However, because of colonization and the destruction that colonization has attempted to bring here, those shell mounds, many of them were desecrated and destroyed. However, underneath the surface, layers of those shell mounds are still intact underneath the pavements. Ohlone people, we still pray to those places even today. We still revere them because we know our direct and immediate ancestors are buried there. And many of these shell mounds are underneath parking lots, or underneath schools, or underneath garages. And people will say, why are you working to protect that parking lot? Why are you trying to protect that space if there's no evidence of it on the surface? And people often don't remember that underneath that surface, layers and layers and layers of thousands of years of history are still right here. And even if you can't see it, those places are still worthy of being protected, and so are those people. Our community has consistently worked to protect our shell mounds and our ancestors in the grounds against the wishes of developers for generations, and we're still doing this even today. And we're very excited to know that the West Berkeley shell mound, which developers were adamant on trying to develop, last year was protected, and the city of Berkeley sided with Ohlone people and sided to protect the shell mound, even after court appeals from these developers who only wanted to see destruction of that place for short-sighted profit. Luckily, the city of Berkeley did the right thing, and they stood with us, representing our sovereignty and representing our enduring connections to this place. And that shell mound underneath the ground is protected, and that makes us feel especially happy. Our ancestors, they would lay these shells above those burials and over and over and over for thousands of years, creating these places. And these foods that we're going to eat right now are the exact same foods that would be eaten over that place before ceremony, eaten over that place with other family members long ago. So as we eat these, we're reminded to protect the sacred, protect our ancestors, and make sure that we teach this to future generations so that these places will always be protected, and that we can make sure that the sacred nature of our home is always safe as well. these shellfish mean a lot to us. They're more than just food, but they connect us to our culture and to our ancestors. We have our salad just about done, I think, and we have our mussels done, our tea done, and our acorn bread. Would you like to share this beautiful image? Look at that. Lewis is the salad
Oh my gosh.
guru right here. Yes, Lewis has,
wow.
he's so good at making these salads. And when we see these, we say our food dispels stereotypes. Because let me tell you, in the past, people have said the worst things about Ohlone people, written the worst things, said the worst things about our food. And those things have been accepted as fact by anthropologists, by those who teach our culture who aren't Ohlone. And over time, those lies get passed on. And what those lies essentially say is that what we were doing before Europeans came wasn't good enough, or it was minimalist, or it was simple. And none of that's true, though. The truth is that our ancestors lived in a world full of sophistication, full of dignity, full of happiness, full of richness. And when we see these foods aren't simple, and these foods aren't minimal, but these foods are complex, they're delicious, they're nourishing, they're rooted. And these are the foods that I want on our table, not the other foods that we're imposed to.
Right.
So these foods right here are worthy of being protected, and we're certain that these foods will be carried on into our future. This is decolonization in action right here. It's a beautiful thing. We're happy to be able to have these in our bellies and part of our souls. We're going to plate these, this meal, and then we'll answer a few questions. And then after that, I think Lewis and myself are gonna have a very decadent lunch here. So let's plate these mussels right here, and then we'll show you the full plate once it's all done.
Okay. So how much sorrel do you use in the salad? Is it more of an accent, or do you use quite a bit in there?
It's quite a bit, but it is also accenting the watercress.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is.
Wow.
How much?
That is
That's the plate. So once again, we have chorro, the mussels, hakau, the clams.
Mm-hmm.
We have, or that's the rumsen, we say hawa. We have the Ohlone salad, kahamara. We have, the sourdough bread, we didn't have a translation for it, obviously.
Yeah.
So we had to make up a word, which we do a lot in our community when we don't have something, using old words to create something new. So what we called this is kahapulu, with so the second word is rumsen, which is a different language. So excuse me if I butchered that one.
Yeah.
Kaha is the Chochenyo word for bitter, and puhut is the rumsen word for a baked bread.
Mm-hmm.
So this is bitter or sour baked bread in Chochenyo and rumsen.
My grandma's very excited for the sourdough bread recipe.
And then of course those mussels and clams were with California seaweed, sea lettuce, scallions to substitute for the Indian onion. And then the Ohlone salad has watercress, blackberry with bay laurel that we gather in the hills, gooseberry, which are those beautiful little tart orange berries that are right there, walnuts that are cracked in a mortar, and then that sorrel that comes from our garden. So it's quite a meal, and we're happy to dive in soon. But before we do, we'd like to be able to spend some time, if any of you have questions. Thank you all for taking your time to listen to what we're doing and hear a little bit about our culture. We want you all to all know that Ohlone people are here. Our tribe is the Muwekma Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area, for myself, and we're the indigenous people of right here in the East Bay.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also like to acknowledge once again my partner, Louis Trevino, who's Rumsen Ohlone, and the Rumsen community is in Carmel Valley, Monterey area. And together we work in a way that keeps these foods on the table. And it means a lot to see our grandparents here joining us because of them, we can be here doing the same thing.
Well, thank you again. That looks amazing. And I'm sad that I'm not there right now. Well, we do have a few questions before we let you jump into your lunch. A kind of one of the simple questions, what is in your garden, or what do you like to grow in your garden?
We have a lot growing in our garden right now. So we grow a lot of medicinal plants, like things that we use as medicines, mugwort, which helps with good dreams and relaxing during stressful times, as I'm sure you all know we're in right
Yeah.
now. Yerba Santa, which is a decongestant and helps you breathe easier.
Mhm.
We grow aloe vera, which comes from it comes from my great grandmother Mary, from a plant that she had. It's one of the offshoots of that, and that's thriving back here. And my great grandmother, she passed away when I was 15, but she kept these way strong for us. And that aloe was her aloe, and it's still growing and thriving back in our backyard. And my grandma Bonnie, she gave me a start of it that older plants. And so that's growing back there in case we get scrapes. So our great grandmother's still there helping us all the time. We have tomatoes growing, basil, oregano, tarragon, stevia, chia, California native chia. We have juncus, we have black sage, we have hedge nettle, which has like a banana Laffy Taffy taste. California bunch grasses, because we want to get rid of those European grasses imposed here and bring back our native grasses. And we also have just a bunch of beautiful flowers too, because we all need beauty around us, right? We're in a beautiful place, but we want to make sure to indigenize that landscape as much as we can back to the old way that it was.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, we have a question on younger folks. So getting into the restaurant business, getting into the cafe business, being a chef is difficult. You have to manage a lot of different things going on at the same time, be good multitaskers like you all are. So when you're talking with the younger Ohlone folks, what do you tell them? What kind of advice do you give to them when they say that they would like to join you in promoting Ohlone food and food sovereignty?
Well, if they are part of our tribe, they're immediately into this work. We want to empower as many people as we can within our community, and we want this work to be inclusive, not exclusionary, but a multi-generational, multi-lineage effort that's going to be able to bring our people together and keep these ways strong. In the 1920s and before that, our great-grandparents were born into a federally recognized Ohlone tribe called the Verona Band of Alameda County, which was based on the old Pleasanton Rancheria, about 15 miles from where I'm at right now. That's where all of the great-grandparents of our tribe were born at during that time. However, as a result of an anthropologist at UC Berkeley who said that our people were extinct, an agent from the Bureau of Indian Affairs in 1927 wrote that our people didn't need that land anymore and didn't need to be recognized. And they forced our people from that protected space into a society that was still trying to destroy everything indigenous here. Our great-grandparents, they suffered through that time, but they survived it. They looked after one another, they protected one another, they made sure that each other were safe, that they had food, that they had a place to stay if they didn't. And they knew that there was something much scarier that was threatening our culture that they had to be united against. Today, those messages ring more true than ever. When we look to the strength of our great-grandparents in the Verona Band, we think about what the power is when we can come together to be able to work for a common goal and to be able to see our collective family, our collective tribe empowered with this. And when people are empowered with this culture, when they're empowered with our language and our foods, their self-esteem improves. They understand that, that these foods are valuable. They understand that there's something that they have a right to be proud of when it comes to these foods. And these foods dispel stereotypes, but these foods empower us with the truth. They connect us to our ancestors, and they also allow us to see that old world that was here long before we were born, but those old values that have been continued, that are continued even to this day, and again, will be continued into the future. So when young people want to come in, we tell them, work with us, come with us. We like to be able to teach people our language. We like to be able to spread these foods, and we'll do that as long as we can until our last breath. So this work, that's what our great-grandparents taught us, is to make sure that you share this and to make sure that you're proud of it as well.
So when you're researching these foods, how do you go about that? Is this where you just talk with elders? Are there documents that you can follow? Older gardens that you can visit? What are the ways that you get to your food today?
Well, it's a mixture of, so listening to our elders, there's a big part of that. Like our elders, for an example, there's this amazing amount of information that's been carried on intergenerationally that goes all the way back to the beginning. An example of this is elders in our tribe still remember our creation story that we still believe that goes back to the very beginning of the world, that's been passed on intergenerationally, that's never been disconnected, and it's still passed on today. In fact, after a language story revival, it's only getting stronger, that story. So we listen to those elders about the love that they have, but as they start to talk about our foods, they start to remember a whole lot. An example of this is my grandmother Bonnie. She'll talk about Ohlone foods that my great grandmother Mary would gather, some of which we eat regularly here at home. Things like excuse me, one moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excuse me. Things like purslane, things like watercress, things like some of the teas that we gather, artemisia. And when we listen to our great-grandparents, or we listen to our grandparents about those foods our great-grandparents love, it makes you love those foods as well, just because we love those people that we come from, and we want to taste those same things. That's one way that we learn. And I'll give you another example of what this looks like in action. We have one of the matriarchs in our tribe is our Auntie Dottie. Her name is Dolores Lamera Galvan. And Auntie Dottie, she's in her 80s, and she's one of those old timers that has so much information.
Yeah.
And she has so much love and care for our community. Auntie Dottie, she started to talk about about this tea right here, the rosehip tea. She started to talk about it, and she said that her mom would make this tea for her when she was a girl. She said that her mom would always have teas on the stove, and that those teas were like medicine. They were medicines, and they would always be given to her when she was young. She said how good that tea was, and she said to make sure we serve it at Cafe Ohlone. After she started to talk about that tea, she started to talk about the meat of the red-breasted robin and how sweet that food was, how sweet the meat was.
Okay.
And how she missed it, how good it was. As she started to talk about the traditional food, the red-breasted robin and the meat that comes from that,
Mm-hmm.
she started to think about Ohlone feathered basketry, which are some of our finest works of art. Anthropologists will say Ohlone feathered baskets stopped being woven 200 years ago, but Auntie Dottie, she knows that that's not true. She said that when she was a young girl, she saw those feathered baskets in her Auntie Cecilia's house over in Pleasanton. And she said that those baskets, how beautiful they were, and how rich they were.
Yeah.
And talking about food connected her to that. So by listening to those elders, they have so much information. We respect that. And we want to incorporate and listen with open ears, open hearts, and make sure that these foods grow stronger with their guidance. For those foods that can't be remembered, because colonization hit us very early here. Early for some, late for others. It hit us in the 1770s, so much later than the East Coast, for an example, but much earlier than parts of like Alaska and Northern California. But when colonization did come, it worked immediately to try to separate us from these foods.
Right.
And one way that our family kept these foods strong through a hard time was they documented thousands of pages of those things in the 1920s. They shared every bit that they could about every word that they could remember in our language, every bit of story that they could remember. They recorded the injustice our community experienced, how our community responded to that. They recorded slavery happening right here in California that they saw with their own eyes, and who was the ones involved in those acts and doing those bad deeds. And they also talked about food. They talked about how much they love these ways, how much they miss them, and how they want to see them come back again. And as they were talking about these foods, they often we reminded how much they miss them. Sometimes, like for Isabel Meadows, for the Rumsen Ohlone community in the 1920s, she wrote that the acorn bread, how sweet it was, and that she wishes that she could have some right then because it was so good. Now, when you see those things and you read those things, it makes you want to, make sure that those foods aren't just locked on paper, but that they're living again a second time, that we could have them and then spread them so that they'll never be sleeping again. And our language gave us an example of how that's possible. And with that language, going from not having fluent speakers 20 years ago to now having a community of speakers who use our language regularly, taught us that we don't have to stay locked into what we were born into. If we didn't have something when we were young, that doesn't mean that we have to stay locked in that place forever. But with hard work and making sure that we have a lot of respect and incorporating our community, doing this together collectively, we can see those things fixed and passed on. And then it's almost like they never went away at all. And then that's how healing takes place. This meal right here is a part of that healing too.
Let's see, I think we'll take just a couple of quick questions and then we'll let you all get your lunch. One real quick question for you. Someone would like to know more about your Ohlone coffee that's described on your webpage. If you could tell us a little bit more about that. They say it sounds delicious.
Sure, absolutely. So let me first of all show you what's So this right here, these are bay nuts, okay? These bay nuts that are here, in Chochenyo we call these sokotiwula. And these bay nuts that are here, they come from the bay tree, so the California bay tree, so specifically the California ones. And they only come for about 1 to 2 months out of the year. Now, let me give you an example of how this is. Do you mind handing me that mortar, Lewis? Thank you. Okay, so got the bay nut right here. Okay, so it's little tiny, little tiny thing right here. Okay, crack it, and inside there's another nut that's here. This little guy right here. You all see that?
Yep.
And then that nut right there gets roasted. After it gets roasted, it comes out, and oh my gosh, if you could know how these taste. They taste like dark chocolate and espresso together, and they actually give you a caffeine buzz. Ask our Auntie Billy, she had 3 of them one night, and she was up till 3 in the morning because they kept her up all night. They're like having shots of espresso. So these, they're such a fine food. And traditionally, the way that our ancestors, and even to this day, the way that we eat them, is we grind them down in a mortar until after they're roasted, until they form like a fine powder, and the oils press out. After they press out, the oils, they let out this natural oiliness that helps them shape into these little truffles. And they're, you add just a little bit of bay salt to it, and then you serve it on a leaf of watercress with a dried Indian strawberry, a dried wild strawberry. And that's the traditional way to eat it. So you get the earthiness of the watercress,
right,
the like the chocolatey and the espresso-ness of the bay nut, and then you get the sweetness of the strawberry. So we grind that down into, before we shape them into the truffles, we grind them down into powder. And then when we do pour overs, we'll add a little bit of that bay nut truffle powder on top of the pour over coffee. Pour the hot water over, and then the bay nut immerses with the coffee beans and gives it that really unique taste that is peppery and chocolatey and just so good altogether.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing.
And then of course with fresh hazelnut milk too that we make ourselves. Can't forget that.
Absolutely. Yeah, part of the resurgence of indigenous foodways and the reclamation of indigenous foodways are these nuts, right? That are not a large part of the standard American diet, also known as the SAD diet, but just our variety of nuts, right? There were nut milks, nut flours that formed all across the United States, well, all across the Americas, really the basis for a lot of our diets. So knowing how to do things like prepare acorns, right, is so important in all of this reclamation. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yes, and we're happy to see this grow. And once again, thank you to our Auntie Billy for teaching us about the acorn preparation. She's the expert. We're learning right now. So we got to give credit where credit's due.
Well, thank you, Auntie Billy, for teaching them so well so that they can feed us. And I think we'll end on this last question. This comes from a student at Davidson. Ashley would like to know, and I'll preface this by saying, given the times that we live in, given the struggles that people are facing with COVID, given the struggles that we're going through now in social justice movements, and given how you all are working through this with your cafe, which I know needed to be shut down in the midst of all of this, Ashley would like to know what inspires you and what is keeping you positive through this right now.
Well, I'd like to share, and then I actually was going to share something that answers this perfectly.
Yeah.
But in times of hardship, like what we're going through, our community has always looked after one another and has always made sure to make that we have what we need to be safe. And in this time, that social net is coming into action right now as well, the social safety net, to make sure our elders have what they need. We can provide culture to our people. We can make sure that our families are safe, our grandparents have food, make sure that we're able to do what we can. And this is an effort that's happening all throughout our community, not just us, but all throughout. Now, I'd also like to say that this is a reflection of our traditional values as well. And that's in spite of whatever has been attempted to be imposed on our people, our people have always been able to keep those values close, to make sure, you know, when our community went through hard times with, and there's still hard times that are here with our tribe not having recognition, but we also have to acknowledge the things that our great grandparents went through were much harder than what we're going through right now in 2020 in different ways. But they survived those times, and that gives us a lot of inspiration and hope, and to know that we can survive whatever we're experiencing in this moment as well. There was a time that there was a genocide imposed on our people that was legalized by the California government, and our ancestors suffered through that time through a series of massacres and state-sponsored genocide, where it was illegal to even be an Ohlone person. Our great-grandparents, they were at the tail end of all of that when they were born. But, and the parents before them definitely lived through that. But they refused to give up. They found every way to keep our culture moving forward, and they made sure to look after their family, to look after community, and to keep each other safe. In this time that we're living in, those old values and that old wisdom rings more true than ever. And those values that have been passed on from our grandparents, from our parents, they're part of us right now in this moment. And those values also, they define who we are as people. Those are old values that go back to the very beginning of the world, that are given to us from our Creator. And those are values that will be carried on into our future. I'd like to say this in Chochenyo, which is that Nesa mak etwe etwe, mak inhinsush, mak nunu, mak suyakma, mak amham, aye mak wara ishasin, aye horsha mak muek mahushishtak. Which means, as the world changes around us, we know that our culture, our ancestors, our family, and our land will take us into a hopeful future. Thank you all for listening, and please know that the Ohlone people are here, the Muwekma Ohlone people are here, the Rumsen Ohlone people are here, and we'll be here tomorrow also. Our culture is beautiful, and our culture is worthy of being protected. Thank you all very much. Ashikmak.
Thank you, Wado, and especially thank you for opening up your kitchen and allowing us in to get a glimpse of the behind the scenes at the Ohlone Cafe, and allowing us to be in your homes in the midst of all of this chaos as well. We really appreciate you all coming out to view this. Thank you again to Chef Vincent and Chef Lewis. I do want to say that we will be posting resources up on our website. So if you would like to know more about Cafe Ohlone, and keep tabs on when they might be opening soon so you can go visit and support them, we will have that web page up. So please do visit that. And again, thank you so much. Yeah.
And you can follow us also at Makamham, MAKAMHAM on Instagram.
You got Instagram, any Twitter, Facebook?
Yes. No Facebook. Too much drama. Just Instagram and Twitter.
That's it.
All right. All right. Stay safe, everybody.
Post all of those up. So we'll post all of those links up for you all. You all stay safe as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.